my disembodied voice. In today's video, I want to talk about loneliness and some fantastic portrayals of loneliness in the movies. In all of my years of working in mental health and the psychiatric field, one of the most common and saddest problems I have come across is loneliness and the crippling effects that it creates on a person. The easiest room to walk into and the hardest one to escape from, loneliness is a truly devastating problem. But just what is loneliness? How does it affect the brain, and which movies get it right? Well, join me today as we look at loneliness, and before anyone says anything, I haven't included Castaway as I've never seen it, so there's no Wilson the basketball to be found here. Anyway, let's crack on. So, just what is loneliness? Well, according to the CDC, it's defined as loneliness is the feeling of being alone, regardless of the amount of social contact. Social isolation is a lack of social connections. Social isolation can lead to loneliness in some people, whilst others can feel lonely without being socially isolated. Now, in social species such as humans, non-human primates, and even many rodent species, social interaction and the maintenance of social bonds are necessary for mental and physical health and well-being. In humans, perceived isolation or loneliness is not only characterized by physical isolation from peers or loved ones, but also it involves negative perceptions about social interactions and connectedness that reinforce the feelings of isolation and anxiety. As a complex behavioural and emotional state, it's no surprise that loneliness and isolation are associated with dysfunction within the ventral striatum and limbic system. And these are brain regions that regulate motivation and stress responses respectively. Accompanying these neural changes are physiological symptoms such as increased plasma and urinary cortisol levels and an increase in stress responsivity. Although studies using animal models are not perfectly analogous to the uniquely human state of loneliness, studies on the effects of social isolation in animals have observed similar physiological symptoms such as increased corticosterone, the rodent version of human cortisol, and also display altered motivation, increased stress responsiveness, and dysregulation of the mesocortical dopamine and limbic systems. And loneliness has 5 major tenets which affect personality, interaction, mental health, and also physical health. And these are: number 1, cravings for companionship. Loneliness triggers neural responses in the brain similar to the activity seen when people are hungry and want food. Number 2, increased hostility and pessimism. Loneliness may make us more hostile and pessimistic. Number 3, reduced trust in others. Feeling lonely may make us less likely to trust others. Number 4, cognitive decline. Loneliness may contribute to cognitive decline. Number 5, physical health impact. Loneliness due to social isolation can affect physical health, resulting in decreased immune function, sleep disturbances, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke, and metabolic disorders. Now, Livia Tomova, a neuroscientist at the University of Cambridge in England, found that in terms of comparing a hungry person looking at food and an isolated person feeling lonely, studies showed that they shared the same neural signature between these two states. So we have a clear connection in terms of neurodevelopment and biological functioning. Social relationships are critical for health and well-being of the individual and for the survival of social species. For example, neuropeptides such as oxytocin, basically known as the love hormone, and vasopressin, and neurotransmitters such as dopamine, known as the pleasure hormone, and endorphins are critically involved in promoting affiliative and social seeking behaviours. In addition, stress-related neuropeptides, such as glucocorticoids and corticotrophin-releasing hormones, are increased during social isolation and social ostracization, leading to anxiety and depressive-like behaviors and altering sociality in various ways. And a depressed mind can act in ways which are not congruent or conducive and start to cause odd behavior as the mind begins to seek companionship and distraction in any form possible. And this is where we come to our first example as we talk about Robert Neville, played by world famous slapper Will Smith in the movie I Am Legend. In the aforementioned film, Neville is potentially the last man left alive following a plague which has killed the majority of people and turned the rest into terrible CGI carnivores who are allergic to sunlight. So, Will Smith spends his days hunting for food in an abandoned city, playing golf alone, and then returning to his home at night and shutting everything down as a single noise could alert the appalling army of cheap CGI creatures to his location. Due to doing this day in and day out and having nothing but his dog for company, he's resorted to some rather unusual methods of creating companionship. One such method is arranging mannequins around certain shops and, upon arriving each day in said shop, he starts to converse, flirt and joke with these dummies. They are even given names and, considering he has nobody else to converse with and his entire outlook, mental state and situational dynamics are breaking down under the enforced isolation, they have taken on their own microcosm of a world in Neville's mind. Due to not being born into this isolation and familiar with both social cues and how social interaction works, Smith role-plays with the dummies and talks to them as if they are real people and is even building up to asking one of them out. But why? Why would he be acting so shy rather than in a more assertive way with an inanimate object? Well, let's come back to the cravings for companionship factor we spoke about earlier. According to research, very lonely people act in either two ways, which are introverted or extroverted. This is when we get shyness or hostility, and this is very much dependent on a person's temperament. Now, Smith is already depressed from having lost all of his loved ones and spent days going through the cognitive decline of being lonely, and as these dummies are his only companions, I'm not including the dog in this, by the way, as whilst animals are marvellous companions, we cannot engage in reciprocal conversations with them, have sex with them, or discuss things such as philosophy or how bad our days have been with them. So, coming back to the mannequins, what Smith is doing is creating a substitutive drama and fitting this into his own personality and creating an enduring scenario of routine. Now, if Neville starts kissing the dummies or drilling a hole in one so he can use it as a sex toy, the delusion would be more than likely broken and a full sense of reality would shatter his coping mechanisms. We all live in denial of some things, be it relationships ending or refusing to accept that someone is gone, but for Smith, the world is gone, his loved ones are gone, and he is possibly the last man left alive, so everyone is gone and everything is gone. Therefore, what he needs to create is a state of stasis where he has the most vital component needed to fight the crushing sense of loneliness. And that component is hope. Now, to paraphrase the great sociopath and all-round brilliantly written character that is Alice Morgan from the TV show Luther, when it comes to hope, people believe the future will be better than the evidence of the present can possibly justify. And this is crucial because for Neville, the possibility that the rest of his life will be spent alone is crushing, and for someone whose personality is based upon decency, morality and caring, he's not meant to live alone. So, pro-social, intelligent and a family man, Neville has now spent months and months in isolation, and the only hope is that his broadcast will be heard and things will somehow change, and this is what keeps him going. Also, as his friends are mannequins, he creates familiar scenarios which are already comfortable to him and familiar because by flirting and talking to the mannequins, he's never actually breaking the fantasy and having sex with them, as that would be silly and illusion shattering. So he continuously creates a drama he is in control of and has no conclusion, but is something to cling to. In other words, there's always hope. Even though he's talking to a dummy, there's still hope that one day it might answer, that he might change the story, that something changes and he can change the story. There is a hope in this situation of hopelessness. Also, Neville's personality and frame of reference, whilst affected by loneliness, creates familiar scenarios through memory. And memory is important when it comes to loneliness, as memory comes under a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and in terms of episodic memory, the dentate gyrus is part of the hippocampal formation in the temporal lobe of the brain. Research has pointed to changes in the brain when people grapple with above average levels of loneliness. A letter to the editor published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019 described a study that followed the health trajectories of 9 polar expeditioners who lived in solitude in Antarctica for 14 months. The researchers found that part of the crew members' brains, the aforementioned dentate gyrus, shrank by about 7%. Now, the dentate gyrus is responsible for feeding information into the hippocampus to help with learning and memory. The crew members even had reduced blood levels of a protein called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which plays a role in stress regulation and memory. Decreases in BDNF were significantly linked to decreases in dentate gyrus volume. Overall, the polar explorers fared worst on memory and spatial processing tests. So for Neville, he would also be having this form of reduction happening to his brain. And it's why his scenarios with the dummies are so important, because in a way, he's going from memory and also creating new memories, stimulating his brain, and also giving his senses something to interact with, even though nothing is coming back in terms of sound or movement or any kind of other real sense apart from sight. Now, recent neuroscience research has shed light on the feeling of loneliness, and it's suggested it is linked to brain regions involved in social cognition and emotional regulation, such as the prefrontal cortex and amygdala. So, with the dentate gyrus impaired and shrinking, and thus affecting the ability for new memories and learning techniques, the amygdala and prefrontal cortex are now affecting mood. Loneliness is affecting the entire neurodevelopment and physiology of the brain itself. So, emotions are changing, memory is being altered, and a lack of interaction is activating endocrinal changes, which are, as stated at the start, similar to the ones we experience when lacking food or water. And, of course, with the only postulation of hope that things will improve, Neville keeps a routine, a line of fake people in a microcosm of what society used to be, but with his moods in flux, object interpretation is affected and his short-term memory is impacted. So his behaviour is going to be odd, eccentric and bizarre. However, you don't have to survive an apocalypse or plague to be lonely. After all, whilst complete isolation may offer social deprivation, you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. And take Bob Harris from Lost in Translation, who, like Scarlett Johansson's Charlotte, is suffering from isolation and loneliness in a foreign city. And in the movie The Faculty, Josh Hartnett's Zeke Tyler goes to school and is surrounded by people, but unable to form connections and all alone amidst a sea of people he cannot connect with or simply despises. The changes in his brain chemistry are going to continue, much like Will Smith's in I Am Legend. Yes, they won't be as severe, but being removed from routine, familiarity, comfort and loved ones, like in Lost in Translation, or being isolated due to not relating to kids in school or being bullied, the lack of positive emotions, hormonal connectivity, shrinking of the brain which deals with memory, perception and object relations, and also the cognitive decline are all facets which are going to happen. It's worth noting that in the faculty, for Zeke, he is going to suffer more because he is younger and therefore his brain, even at that age, is still forming a lot of new neural connections. However, when we get old and our brains change and certain brain cells start dying, we still crave companionship. So in Lost in Translation, the effects are going to be the same but different, if you kind of know what I mean. Anyway, let's get back to our earlier tenets of loneliness and close with talking about hostility and reduced trust in others. And let's take the outstanding movie 28 Days Later and Naomi Harris's character Selena, who starts the movie as a paranoid and hostile, but ends up as quite the opposite. Like Will Smith in I Am Legend, Selena is surviving a plague which appears to be wiping out humanity. However, unlike Smith, who is filled with hope and praying for connection, Selena states there is no hope, no falling in love, no future, and from now on, life is all about just surviving. She is also going through the same changes in her brain with the dentate gyrus, amygdala, and prefrontal cortex, and she's also having the same endocrinal chemical changes in her brain from lack of companionship that, as we mentioned before, are similar to lack of food and water, but like me with low blood sugar, she's frosty, hostile and agitated. And this comes back to old friends of this channel, personality and self-esteem, because these make up who we are. Remember, our personalities are like an immune system for the mind, and a strong and resilient personality offers good resistance to adverse situations and poor physical health. And our personality type is important as, whilst a dependent personality would fall apart in loneliness, an antisocial or compulsive personality may flourish due to lack of constraints or absences of being judged. And it's important to remember that when it comes to personality, whilst there are biological facets which affect our personalities, we are all products of our environment and engineered through nurturing via the impact of both positive and negative facets that people make on our lives. Remove people, and with areas of the brain becoming stagnant, inactive and shrinking, and also the lack of reciprocation, the social skills, compulsivity, apathy and withdrawal will affect the person's frame of reference, behaviour and long-term personality facets. Beliefs are important here, and so is our old friend hope. And when there is no future, or when you are kept away from people for a prolonged period of time, then the brain's neuronal connectivity starts to diminish. So whether it be the apocalypse, that gruff old character has been round the block a few times, or the loner who cannot connect, loneliness is a truly devastating thing, and something the movies capture really well when putting great characters on screen. And going back to world famous slapper Will Smith, he plays the whole of I Am Legend in a truly sunken and depressive state of resignation. That's what loneliness has done to him. Then we take Selena from 28 Days Later, who is hostile and closed, and whilst you're not going to get descriptions of what it's doing to someone's brain in the movies, you can clearly see her interactions and personality, how they've been changed, but more importantly, how they can be changed back into something positive once she starts reconnecting and meeting people that she bonds with. Overall, I think movies tackle loneliness really well. But what about you guys and gals? Are there any movies you think loneliness has been done well in? It would be good to get some examples in the comments. And that's it for this week's video. So remember that psychology is cool. Please like, share and most of all subscribe, as more subs means more vids, and even leave a comment if you want, because healthy debate and discussion is always welcome on here. And as ever, until next time, I'll catch you later.
Nothing happened the way it was supposed to happen.